Hey everyone, my name is Chris, and today we're going to be talking about Kanye West. Specifically, the album Ye. It's 2 years since Ye came out, which on the one hand feels like they've gone by so fast. uh, but then in a lot of other ways, when you think about everything that's happened in those 2 years, that it's only been 2 years is kind of amazing as well. It feels like dozens, dozens at this point. But I thought it was a good time to revisit Ye and talk about my favorite concept or content, the concept of the content of the album. In this case, what is going on with the themes and story of Ye? Because I know there are people that are really coming back to this album. When it first came out, there was a lot of controversy just regarding Kanye at that time, but this is a bit experimental. It's only 7 songs, 24 minutes. The songs don't tend to flow as well as people would have wanted just because it's such a minimalist project. So there's a lot of juxtapositions between them, which is cool but also harsh, and that can turn a lot of people off rather than having a sound that kind of evolves over time. Like you listen to My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, and by the time you're getting to tracks like Runaway, Hell of a Life, Blame Game, Lost in the World, you've gone on this big sonic journey from dark fantasy. But you have the territory there to really go on that journey. But with an album like Ye only being 7 songs in 24 minutes, it's a lot sharper going from this to this to this to this, which turned a lot of people off. The lyrical content and the concept turned a lot of people off, either because they didn't get the concept or didn't care about the concept, but the execution of it was off-putting, especially when you don't understand it. I could see how it could be problematic. But with people, kind of having some distance and time from it and being able to come back to it on their own terms, really discovering commentary that Kanye has on mental health and on himself that's been pretty endearing, and I think people have found comfort in, just because an album that's so much about mental health and improvement and growth is something that a lot of us can relate to, at least at some point in our life. And it's been cool to see how many people have started to love this album and really come to appreciate it and want to have a more positive relationship with it. So to that end, here's going to be me explaining the themes and some of the concept and artistry of it. So first off, we're just going to start with the cover. You look and you see the phrase, "I hate being bipolar. It's awesome." Kanye said when he went on Jimmy Kimmel that that's not an opposites thing, right? It's not this one, then this one, that it's more kind of all at once, which is kind of emblematic of how we all are, right? We're not made up of a bunch of opposites. We're just constantly the things that we are. People are nice and jerks. They're angry and calm. It's just the situations that we're in that kind of bring out these different facets in all of us. Some more so than others with extremes, but we embody all of these contradictions all the time. And you get that right up front with the very first lines that we hear Kanye say. The most beautiful thoughts are always beside the darkest. I hate being bipolar is a dark thought. It's awesome is beautiful. And that's just one of the ways in which the theme or the concept of the album gets expressed. Like in movies too, the opening shot tends to be kind of a catch-all for the concept that you can take away from that shot when you look back at the movie, everything that's kind of going on. When it's a movie on that level, right, that is really caring about the cinematography and the expression of its themes through the mise en scène, all of that stuff. Like Fight Club, it starts in the brain and travels out to a gun and Tyler Durden, Brad Pitt holding the gun to Edward Norton's mouth. Something like that just kind of captures the fact that Tyler is just a figment of the brain, and that this whole movie is about the brain chemistry and makeup and the attitude and mental aspects of what's going on in Edward Norton's character's mind, what he's dealing with. So it's little things like that that happen. Kanye does something similar here with just the first line of the album, capturing what we're going to be exploring on the album. Beautiful thoughts come out of dark thoughts. And they're not opposites. They're part of the same system. They're not contradictions to each other. They're just part of a whole. So that's one of the cool things of just hearing how that is used at the start of the album, but then taking that core concept and bringing it out to how do we express that on the cover to just reinforce what this theme is. And it's through that statement. And really, that statement tells us that this is also going to be an album about mental health. And when you look at the opening spoken word portion of I Thought About Killing You, it's all very philosophical, but also getting at mental health. Like, you would read this and think, oh, this is somebody that's really dealing with something and going through something and kind of trying to process these emotions and figure out where they're at mentally. So that's one of the cool things too, that here it's both are kind of showing, but in their different ways. This primes us for a mental health discussion, and then this is actually showing us the mental health discussion happening. And then there's something cool with the mountains, which probably going to be a little bit harder of a point to defend, because what I want to say is that because it's nature and this album is about human nature, there's something very cool about it just being the mountains and the grass and the beauty and ugliness and richness of nature, and just being the honest, stripped down, truthful thing, which is what Kanye's trying to do with this album. And I can imagine people saying, Chris, Kanye took that photo on an iPhone on the way to the listening party. What thought did he put into the picture? And I would counter with, good point, that's fair. But at the same time, Kanye can still have the concept in mind of what he wants the album cover to be, and just know that I'm going to take this photo from the start, and it doesn't matter when it happens or what it's specifically of, but he just knows that he wants something natural because this album is supposed to be natural. So that would kind of be my counter to that point. I wouldn't say that that's 100% what he had in mind, but it's just very fitting given the content of the album. And then the title of the album, Yay, is excellent too, just in the fact that it's a lowercase y. Kanye talked about this as being the destruction of ego. And this is one of my favorite things, because you look back at his discography and Kanye had really hid behind titles a lot. The college dropout, he's branding himself a dropout. Then you get late registration, graduation, 808s, My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy. Then Yeezus is the next identity he takes on, right? Which is this exaggerated version of Kanye, thinks he's a god, really like blown out and blown up. Then you get The Life of Pablo, where Kanye takes on the Pablo persona. Again, he is putting himself into a character and working through his issues and what's going on in his life through a character. But when we get to Ye, there's no longer a character. It's just him. This is me, which gets back to that natural aspect and gets back to that deconstruction of the ego. And then with it being a lowercase y, there's a cool thing, because Ye said that way is the Old English collective or plural you. So when you're referring to a group of people, you would say ye people, right? It was said ye rather than yay. But having that collectiveness and that word represent the collective is cool, because it again takes Kanye from being Kanye West, yay, Yeezy, Yeezus, Pablo, down to just yay, and one with the people, part of the whole, that collective, which I always like that aspect of the title. And now I'm realizing 9 minutes into the video and haven't even got to the first song. But those are some of the elements and like key elements of just the album name and the cover that kind of prime us for the story that's going to take place. The structure of the album is a chiastic structure, is what it's called. So essentially what that means is it's a witch's hat, kind of like that. So you have the front half that builds up, it peaks at a mid-story climax, and then descends. And usually the two sides are very similar to each other. So you might have the character wake up at the first part of the story. And then the midpoint is they get in a big fight with somebody. And then the very last part of the story is they get back in bed and go to sleep. So you have the beginning with them in bed and the ending with them in bed. And then you might have something where they read a note from their friend on their phone at this point, and it's all full of potential about what could happen. But then at the end, you would have them read the note again, and it's full of sadness because we know what happened between them, that they're no longer friends. So you tend to have these mirrored elements that occur that just kind of balance everything out. The main, I guess, example tends to be the story of Noah and the ark. In that, at the very start, he's told to build the ark. So we see him building it, and then he tells everybody about what's going to happen, gathers the animals on, the flood comes, and it's when the flood comes that's the climax. And then you come down the other side, all the animals get off the ark, he has to deal with other stuff, and then he deconstructs the ark and leaves it. And so you have that nice chiastic structure. So for Ye, it starts off with dark thoughts and really getting into more of that bipolar manic phase, which is what I thought about Killing You, Yikes, and All Mine really get into and deal with. And it peaks with All Mine, right? I thought about Killing You as the ramping up. Yikes is kind of the tipping point where you're losing control. And then All Mine is just all bluster, all ego. And then Would It Leave is the tipping point. It's where he's kind of waking up from that experience and going like, oh shit, what happened? And really looking back at his actions. And it's one of the beautiful things that happen. Even though those dark moments occurred, in hindsight from them, you learn something, you gain something. In this case, it's that his wife wouldn't leave. Even when he did this stuff that could fuck up their marriage, like fuck up everybody's expectations and feelings on Kanye, and he's telling her, you can leave me. I get what I did is like a major issue and a betrayal. And she's saying, no, I stand by you. There's beauty in having that relationship be tested and knowing that you have this person there with you. And then No Mistakes is him trying to be better. Ghost Town is also this major breakthrough leading to violent crimes and all the realizations that we get on violent crimes. So in that way, you see him go from really philosophical about his state of mental health to the end being very philosophical in a completely different way. So you get that chiasm with the beginning and end points, but one's more in the negative and brooding sense, and the other's more in the positive and enlightened sense. So mirrored, but different charges each time. But that also gets at, I hate being bipolar. It's awesome. He wouldn't have the breakthrough he had on violent crimes and all of that knowledge and experience had it not been for everything that he had gone through before, not just on the album, but in life. In some ways, that gets back to everything I am, right? Everything I'm not made me everything I am, but also everything that you've done has made you everything that you are because you're responding to it, reacting to it, sometimes for worse, but oftentimes for better. So there's a lot of cool stuff there. And you can just see in some ways the mental health aspects building or just that ramping up in the early portion. So like one of the sonic ways in which Kanye reinforces that is that every time he says, here, the most beautiful thoughts are always beside the darkest. The first time he says it, there's no music that accompanies it. The second time he says it, you get that which is a little bit musical, but still not a lot going on. But then you see the third time he says it, there's bass that comes in or some kind of synth noise that comes in. There's a lot more vibrato to his voice. The music's about to come forth. So even here, you have these dark thoughts that are defining the first part of the track. But because he's having these dark thoughts, music is starting to build. Music is starting to want to express itself rather than just the darkness. Like there's this beauty that's in the art and the expression of the art. So at the end of that initial verse, you then get into this main verse, and it has two parts in it, which the first part, Kanye starts rapping, but there's still not a lot of music, and it's a really slow flow. He's not like, he's very calm. It's not spoken word because that was like very clearly just speaking. This is more in a flow. He's rapping for sure, but there's still not music. It's still not a big song number. But in the middle of it, yeah, the switch flips and he starts going hard. The music starts pouring on. There's kind of a screaming sound in the background. There's an intensity that builds. And just in that way, you see that the darkness leads not just to art and music, but also to this ego and expression and anger that starts to come out on the song. So then when you get to Yikes, the second track on the album, you have those tensions kind of at play. You have Kanye saying shit could get menacing, frightening, find help. Sometimes I scare myself. This is still the, I guess, default aspect of Kanye, not the manic aspect of Kanye, but that conscious voice telling you, like, oh, I know what's about to happen. I know what I do. Like, this is scary and frightening. But in the verse, you start to see this Kanye that was at the end of I Thought About Killing You really taking hold. That mania starting to come in, which is then countered each time by the chorus until right here. And this is one of my favorite parts on the album. As he's saying with that conscious brain, like, this can get frightening, he's having this mania interrupting, like, play over that's just saying, see, this is why all the, like, bitches fuck with Ye. Yeah, like, fuck what they talking about. It just takes over. And that's what's so frightening about it. That's what's so scary. He's showing us the mania overwhelm whatever he was thinking and doing, and that the ego just takes hold and won't let go. So that by the end, you don't even get the chorus again. You just get Kanye saying, like, see, that's my third person, that's my bipolar, like, that's my superpower. He just straight up at the end announces it, like, this is me in this state, and I feel awesome when it's happening. And that kind of puts a little bit of a twist on It's Awesome as well, right? Because it can be very empowering when you're bipolar. And it also, this is the result. You get this great catchy song, you get this ego and art, it drives you, it takes you to places that you wouldn't have the confidence or brashness to go to, but it can also cause problems, which All Mine, you just have the ego in the driver's seat at this point. And this is a lot of people's least favorite song on the album, and I think that's because a lot of them think that this is the one that's the most superficial, but that's kind of the point. The point is to show that when Kanye gets into this mindset, going from I Thought About Killing You into Yikes to now fully in that manic state on All Mine, he's just talking about, like, oh, women and, like, my ego and all of this very ultimately pointless stuff, right? That's just hollow braggadocio that doesn't really add anything to the world. It feels it feels very distant from College Dropout Kanye, right? Like, there are people that might point to this song and be like, this is what he's become. This was the guy that was doing All Falls Down. And it's like, if you're just looking at the content of the song without the context of what it's doing on the album, yeah, this would seem very superficial and pointless in comparison. But when you realize that this is in the character and supposed to be that, setting up the grander realizations that are going to follow on the album, that makes this song very cool. Like, I think it's awesome because it's the showing, right? That he's not telling us, sometimes I just get egotistical and this is what happens when you're bipolar. He's just actually showing us that this is the mindset that he gets into, and that it gets really one-dimensional and ugly. And what are you supposed to do with it? And that's why the very next song is Would It Leave, because it's Kanye coming out of that manic state. And I would say that also kind of means that All Mine represents kind of where Kanye was at when he went to TMZ. He talked about how he was in a manic episode. It's very obvious when you go back and watch Kanye at TMZ that he was so ramped up when he was there. He just was, yeah. And it was hard for him to really control what he was saying and frame it in the way that he would want to, in a way that people would understand, where he's thinking through what he's saying and presenting it in a way that's is discernible, which we've seen him do in interviews. Like, when you see him talk to David Letterman or talk to Jimmy Kimmel, or even in some of the longer interviews that he's done, he's very thoughtful, listening and considering answers and slow to speak. And then you see him when he's at TMZ and he's just going. So Would It Leave is in the aftermath of TMZ. That's the event that he's kind of speaking to, telling Kim that she could have left him and her not doing it. And it's Kanye realizing all the things that he's done. He even makes a direct reference here. They say, build your own. I said, how, Sway? I said, slavery a choice. They said, how, yay? Just imagine if they caught me on a wild day, which is what Yikes and All Mine were kind of getting to. Like, I feel like All Mine was originally going to be Ecstasy, or Yikes was originally going to be Ecstasy, to really show the wild thoughts. I mean, that song ended up getting a lot of press and gets a lot of a negative attention because it talks about Kanye saying that he has like 4 sisters-in-law that he wants to sleep with, and people are just like, how do you write that lyric? Like, what? They view it as really debaucherous. But again, to me, that's the point. It's him trying to express that when I'm in this state, these are the kind of thoughts that I'm thinking and that I would say. And like, you could just see how wild it can get when you're dealing with this mentality and this mental state. But then he ultimately didn't go with that song. But it went with something I would say similar with Yikes and All Mine. Just getting into that same spirit, but with less controversial lyrics. But this whole thing is him in the aftermath of one of these episodes and seeing the damage that's done when you've been in that state, and realizing that he doesn't want to keep putting his wife and his family in that position and wants to learn from this experience. So I know there were a lot of people that at the time when Ye came out were like, how could he not address everything with TMZ and Trump and all of that? I think it was Pitchfork that said that the album failed because that's what, I guess don't quote me on that, but it was an outlet like Pitchfork that was saying that the album failed because it didn't address any of the controversies of 2018. But the whole thing is addressing his mental state of 2018 heading into the making of the album, with this definitely being kind of the turning point and the tipping point. So No Mistakes ends up being the song that follows, which is cool because the Slick Rick sample with Believe It or Not, the song is completely about Hey Young World, is just Slick Rick chastising this kid about being a dick. And he's like, you need to not be like a little jerk. You need to do right by your family. You need to do right by your community. You need to do better because people are counting on you, and you can't just go do this kind of crazy stuff. You can't be just like a street kid. And No Mistakes is essentially Kanye channeling that energy. He doesn't want to be that worst version of the kid. He realizes he has to be better the same way Slick Rick is telling that kid to be better because he has people depending on him. So this is him in kind of a weird way telling himself that he's not going to fight Drake, that he's trying to do better and avoid controversy, and he's doing this for his wife. This is him promising her that he'll do better after all of the tension and events of 2018. And then that leads to Ghost Town, this major breakthrough of realizing that I don't have to feel the stress that I felt. Like, I can be free. Like, I can wear this starry crown. Like, I know that I piss people off sometimes, and some days I want to hit the red dot on everybody. But like, yeah, I have problems, but ultimately I know that I mean well, and that someday we can understand one another, and I can make myself understood, and that we'll get there. And this breakthrough that he has on this verse, realizing that, you know, he can talk like he drank all the wine, but he is going to be like a kid again, and that he's going to feel free, and he's no longer going to feel that same sense of pressure to impress people that's gotten him into trouble. Kid Cudi says it right there. I've been trying to make you love me, but everything I try just takes you further from me. That sometimes when you're forcing it, and Kanye had been talking a lot leading up to this album about the simulation, and that people get stuck in this simulation and end up not acting like who they really are because society's telling them who they should be, what they can be. He talks about the 4-year-old that stands on a table and it makes him feel like a superhero. But then people say, you can't stand on the table, get down. And that really starts to make the kid feel contained and like they can't channel that energy. So for Kanye, this idea of getting back to a kid, the kid that you used to be, gets back at the idea of not feeling shackled, of feeling like you have this freedom of expression, this freedom of self, that you can actually just be who you are and be the best version of yourself without all the baggage that you've incurred. And so you get this beautiful outro by Shake that then sets up Violent Crimes. Kanye, after having positioned himself back into the eyes of a kid, then starts looking at his own child and looking at his own family and realizing the difference in perspective and his own flaws that he's dealt with over the years. And that comes through just in the fact of how he treated women, right? This idea that you try to take advantage of women as a young man and just are looking for the superficial things. But then when you're a dad, you realize, oh God, I don't want a guy to treat my daughter that way. Which I think a lot of people complained about as just being one-dimensional, being something that is repeated often and is still a very male-driven perspective on the topic, which I can see all of that. But at the same time, I think this kind of stands in for Kanye realizing that the past behavior that a lot of us have can make us monstrous, but at the same time, having an understanding of that behavior and being able to look back on it, we can grow from it. We can come away from it improved. And it gets back at kind of the expression of Ghost Town. Like, he's not legitimately a child again, learning everything for the first time, but he has the eyes of a child again, so to speak, that he can look at a situation like this and really see it for the first time and understand it from a new perspective rather than the one that had been drilled into him that, you know, you just need to sleep with women and that you're the man. No, that's not how it is. That's not what it is. That's not how it has to be. Like, that's just something people told you, but you can be better than that. And that goes for a lot of things. This is just kind of a stand-in for all of the growth that Kanye wants to have and all of the redemption, I guess, he wants to have, and the beauty that can come out of the dark places that you've been. This is just one example of many that can occur. And I love the two things here at the end. Reality is upon us, colors dripping off. Usually, I would say what this gets at, if the colors are dripping off, you paint something up to look better than what it is or to hide something. So when the colors are dripping off, it reveals the reality of it, the natural aspect of it. That gets back to the album cover, right? You're seeing it for what it is, and you have this clarity. But reality is upon us also is a line from the movie The Holy Mountain, which is one of Kanye's favorite movies. He loves Jodorowsky, and that movie is about these guys that go on a quest for immortality. And they're collected up, they go on this quest, they see all this crazy stuff. It's like a bizarre world that they enter into, and they see these 9 men sitting around a table, and they're supposed to have the secret of immortality. So they go up to them, and it turns out that they're all mannequins. And the guy that's been leading the people there says, reality is upon us. Like, look around you. You're in a movie. And the camera zooms back, and you see the camera crew, like the movie crew around the actors. And the guy's still giving this speech about what reality really means and how important reality is, and that there's no such thing as immortality. And it's this really shocking pulling back of the curtain. But knowing that Kanye loves that movie, and this idea that you have in mind the fantastic, but then you really have to confront the reality of what is real and what you really draw from and have in front of you, to have that be at the end of this album, when at the beginning Kanye was so into the fantasy of himself and the ego of everything. That really seems to me to be at why Yikes and All Mine go so ego driven, and here it kind of removes the ego with him wanting to be a father and just thinking about his daughter, and then having this idea of reality is upon us. He's stripping away all of that stuff that was causing him to not be able to see the world for what it is, and people for what they are, and himself for himself. And the coolest thing to me, I think, of the whole album is that you have Nicki Minaj saying this outro. And it's just a voicemail, which you're going to have to bear with me here. This is going to be something else that I feel like some people will be like, that's a stretch, that's a reach. But you look back to My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, and Nicki does the intro to that song, right? And it's on that album that Kanye falls into the twisted fantasy. You start in reality with dark fantasy, gorgeous, and power, and then he jumps out the window, you get the interlude, and you end up in Oz, right? My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy is essentially the Wizard of Oz, but with a negative story arc. And that's why he wakes up in all of the lights, and it's nothing like Kanye's life, right? That's a fantasy. It's dark and it's twisted and sad. And then you get Monster, So Appalled, Devil in a New Dress, all these heightened, excessive songs because Kanye is in that world at that point. That's what celebrity and his life has become for him. This twisted fantasy that's just unlike the reality that he had known on College Dropouts and Late Registration and Graduation. He has gone to someplace other. And then it's after he entered the fantasy that you have Yeezus and Pablo, which are him in these characters heading into Ye, where you end the fantasy. He is coming back to reality, right? What's the opposite of fantasy? Reality. So the fantasies ended, reality's upon us, and then you have Nicki Minaj, of all people, come back in. She hadn't been on Yeezus. She hadn't been on The Life of Pablo. She's not on any other point on this album. There's no reason for her to have a voicemail on here, aside from just her giving the reference for the line, other than to call back to My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy. And just the idea of her having this outro that pulls back the curtain on even the line. There's something very meta about that because the line seems like it comes from Kanye, and you have Nicki saying how she would rap it. She's giving a reference for the line, and you're getting that on this track. So that's really the reality of the situation as well. The really weird and meta, but also cool, and shows that this is the reality. And this is just Nicki calling and leaving a voicemail. It's not her putting on this character and voice. It's not her giving this intro to the fantasy. This is reality. I love it. So Ye. Ye is only 24 minutes, but there's a ton packed into it. And yes, there's a big jump between songs that makes it maybe feel less than cohesive sonically. But I would say that that's part of just a minimalist album, when you're jumping between mindsets and trying to traverse the territory that this album travels to. When you're having the dark contrasted by the beautiful, you're going to have those darker songs up front with I Thought About Killing You, Yikes, All Mine, that then lead into more of the lighter and beautiful tracks that you have at the end. So if you're just going track by track, there can be a lot of, I guess, I'm trying to think of the opposite of cohesion, like incoherence or jarring. It can be jarring going from each one, but when you zoom back and look at the first three and the last three, it makes more sense in that you have darker up front and lighter or more beautiful in the last three, and that there's more cohesion that way, even if it feels like they're a little jarring as you go one to the other. So that's Ye. I love it. I think that concept is so cool and so well executed. And every time I listen to the album, there's something about that, it just being 24 songs, that I can really feel the journey, and really you don't leave behind the opening tracks because you have so much room or ground to cover, right? Like you could get to the end of My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, and Dark Fantasy and Gorgeous can kind of feel like a distant memory at that point because it's been nearly an hour or over an hour since you last listened to them. But with Ye only being 24 minutes, it's only been 20 minutes. So there's something very powerful about that brevity that I think is also present in Jesus is King, and is one of the reasons why I really love Jesus is King the way that I do, as controversial of a statement as that might be. But I feel like 2 years from now, we'll be making a similar video about Jesus is King and how people have come around on that. So this is the long ass Ye video, but I hope it was helpful for some of you. I hope it was enjoyable for those of you who have heard Travis and I talk about this in the past. And if you have any thoughts, questions, concerns, by all means, leave them down below, or hit me up at Kanye Podcast on Twitter. And if you want to support us, easiest way is just liking, subscribing, or commenting, as that tells YouTube that this is a channel that people enjoy. And if you liked this analysis and want to hear us do this for every song in Kanye's discography, www.patreon.com/Kanye Podcast. Our whole catalog of lyrical analyses is on our Patreon, and we have a lot of mini episodes and mini seasons that we're going to be releasing on Patreon. So for $5, you get all of that content, like 118 episodes, I think it is, with the mini seasons that are going to be happening, which, helps us out a lot. So it would be much appreciated, but thank you for taking the time to watch. And until next time, stay wavy and keep it very loopy.